Hello, everybody. Hope you are doing well. We're going to continue with our topic of ecology. We're going to talk today about what consumers, producers, decomposers are, and we're also going to learn how we classify those. So we see here a food web, a food chain, and we are going to also learn about food webs. We're not going to really look at that today yet, but I did want to show you a picture of a food chain so that you can perhaps start thinking about how you construct one. What I'd urge you to do is maybe pause this video and try and figure out which of the organisms below in this food chain are the producers, consumers, and decomposers. Now we're going to learn what those mean on the next couple of slides, but before we do that, maybe challenge yourself to try and define them and identify them, okay? So let's talk about producers, all right? So a producer is an organism that makes their own food, right? Using photosynthesis. So producers make their own food, okay? And when we say make their own food, we mean they're able to gain energy themselves, right? They make it themselves. They don't have to get their energy from an outside source, okay? So a producer gets its energy from the sun, okay? That is a very important thing to remember, that producers get their energy from the sun. They're able to absorb the rays of the sun, and through using other means like water and carbon dioxide, they use photosynthesis to create their own food. So what type of organisms are able to do that? Any sort of plant, right? So trees are producers, flowers are producers, grass are producers, things like bushes, things like moss, vines, weeds, right? Any sort of plant, any sort of producer, right? These are all things that typically are grown, right? So they are in the ground, they utilize soil, they utilize the sun to get their energy, they take in water, right? So any sort of plant is a producer. So if you're ever asked a question about examples of producers, any of these answers would be acceptable. You're also going to see the word producer throughout this unit. So whenever you do, make sure you think about plant, right? Producers utilize the sun to make their energy. Now, on the opposite end of that, you have consumers. So what is a consumer? A consumer is an organism that eats other organisms, right? They eat other organisms. They don't make their own energy. They have to get their energy from an additional outside source. They have to eat something else. Consumers get their energy from either eating producers and other consumers, right? So you could have consumers that eat other producers, or you could have consumers that eat other consumers, or you can have consumers that eat producers and consumers, right? And those all have their own names too, which we're not going to talk about today, but you might already know what I'm talking about, right? Animals that eat only other animals, or animals that eat only plants, or animals that eat both, right? Those are different types of consumers. So examples of consumers can be foxes, tigers, giraffes, humans, basically any species, right? Any species that has to eat or consume, right? Hence the name consumer, another species organism, right? So any type of species or organism that has to eat another organism is known as a consumer, okay? Because they have to consume their energy through another means. They don't make it themselves. We as humans are considered consumers, right? Because we can't sit outside and lay in the sun and get energy. That doesn't happen. We could lay in the sun from now until forever, and we will not get energy from it. All we're going to do is burn. We are not plants. We are consumers. Okay? Now let's talk about those types of consumers we were just mentioning, right? So there are 3 types of consumers. And again, I urge you to maybe pause this video and see, are you able to name the 3 types of consumers that there are in the world? The first one are carnivores. So carnivores are going to eat animals only. Only, I should say. Right? Carnivores don't eat anything other than animals. They have to eat other animals. Meat, right? Carnivores are meat eaters. You then have herbivores, which eat plants only, okay? Plants only. So if you are an herbivore, you're an organism that is an herbivore, you only eat plants. You only eat producers, okay? You only eat producers. You do not eat animals. Then you have omnivores, where they will eat both plants and animals. So producers and consumers, okay? And these are the types of consumers that there are. And this stuff is stuff I'm sure you've already learned, but it's important that we just recap and make sure we are aware of what they mean and that we can give examples of them, right? So carnivores that eat animals, right? These are things like tigers, lions, right? Foxes, right? These things are carnivores, right? They hunt, they eat meat. Then you have herbivores. They eat plants. So these are things like turtles, right? Turtles will eat, vegetables, and they'll eat types of lettuce and grass. Those things are herbivores. Omnivores are things like humans, right? We are omnivores because we consume both plants and we can consume animals. So even if you are vegetarian or you are considered vegan, right? That's totally fine. That's great. You choose to not eat meat. But that is where that's the main thing. You choose to. You can if you wanted to, right? That's what makes us omnivores, is that you have the ability to eat meat, right? You just are choosing not to. So you're still classified as omnivores. Okay? What about a decomposer? So that is another type of organism that we need to understand and learn because it comes up very often in our ecology unit. So a decomposer is an organism that feeds on dead or decomposing animals and plants. Also, you could say decaying, right? Decaying or decomposing. So decomposers will feed on either dead organisms or ones that are already decomposing. So ones that have been dead and are being broken down by nature, right? So these organisms feed on the dead. Now, a decomposer gains its energy from all other organisms in the food chain. This is a very important bullet point to understand. We've just been speaking about producers and consumers. Producers get their energy only from the sun, right? Because they have to make their own energy. Consumers get their energy only from other organisms, either producers or consumers, right? But a decomposer can get their energy from every organism. Whether they are producers, consumers, themselves, they're able to get it from everywhere. And why is that? Because all organisms eventually die. And we just said that decomposers feed on dead animals and plants. And since they feed on the dead, they have the ability to feed on any type of dead organism. So they get their energy from all other organisms in the food chain. Important to remember that, and we're going to see that when we talk about food chains. You'll be able to visualize that. A decomposer, another very important bullet point where if you're asked, what does decomposer do? Well, a decomposer recycles energy in an environment. It helps recycle that energy, okay? And when we talk about recycling, and we're going to see, well, I guess we could just see the examples now, recycling energy is important. It also is important because decomposers will help break down waste. Please remember that they also help break down waste. Can you imagine for a second if decomposers didn't exist, what our world would look like? Every time an animal died, it would just sit there until it rotted, and it would take months, right? Anytime anything, plants, trees, flowers, when they all died, they just pile up. Can you imagine what our forests, what our wilderness would look like if all the dead animals, and you have to realize organisms die by the thousands and probably even more than that every single day, right? But we don't really see it. We don't really think about it. And that is because of our decomposers. They take care of that. So not only do they recycle energy back into the environment, they break down that waste so that our world and our environments feel and look clean and are healthy, Okay. Now, examples of decomposers are things like mushrooms, worms, and even some bacteria, right? There are plenty of examples of decomposers. You can look up more if you are interested, but mushrooms are one of the more common ones, and so are worms, and so are bacteria. Those are the three that you will see most often when we talk about ecology, but there are others if you would like to research that. All right, decomposers. So the last thing we're going to talk about today is how we classify these organisms, right? Specifically our consumers. So consumers, again, are organisms that will eat other organisms. They get their energy from another source, whether it be a plant or an animal. But they are classified as either primary consumers, secondary consumers, tertiary consumers, or quaternary consumers. Those are the classifications. And what those mean is these are the terms where we understand how we order the species in a food chain. So this is an important slide to remember, because when you create your own food chain, you're going to have to order them properly, and you're going to have to specify what they are. So how would we do that? Primary simply means first, of course. Secondary means second. Tertiary is third, and quaternary is fourth. So these are the first consumers in a food chain, primary. The secondary consumers in a food chain are the second consumers. The third consumers are tertiary, and the fourth consumers are quaternary. So let's take a look at this chart here, which gives us sample food chains, right? So the food chains go down. So we have a food chain from the grass biome going this way. We have a food chain from the pond biome and an ocean biome, right? So your primary producers are your grass, right? Because those are the producers, right? And there's only one producer in each food chain. So they are primary, because primary is the first. Now you get into classifying your consumers, right? And you'll see that your primary consumer is a grasshopper. Why is your primary consumer a grasshopper? Well, your primary consumer is a grasshopper because the grasshopper is an herbivore and it eats the grass. So it is the primary consumer. It is the first organism that eats the grass. Therefore, it is the primary consumer. Your secondary consumer is a rat. Now, rats don't eat grass, and because they don't eat grass, they can't be the primary consumer because they're not the first ones. They are the second ones. They are carnivores, right? Because the rat eats the grasshopper. It is secondary. Your tertiary consumer is also a carnivore. It eats the rat. So it gets its energy from the rat. Snakes don't eat grasshoppers typically, and snakes certainly don't eat grass. They eat rats. They have to eat other animals like that. So they are considered the tertiary consumers because they are the third consumers in this food chain. And finally, your quaternary consumers are your hawks because they are the fourth consumers in this food chain, and they eat the tertiary, the snakes. So you have to realize that when you're looking at a food chain, you are ordering your species, you're ordering your organisms in the order that they eat their food. So primary consumers will come right after the producers because they eat grass and they eat flowers. They are herbivores. Your secondary consumers come right after your primary ones. They are the second ones. They are two. They eat the primary. Tertiary is third. They eat the secondary. And quaternary is fourth. They eat the tertiary. Okay? It's important that we first of all remember what these terms mean and remember how to classify them and how to order them. We are going to have much more practice with this when we learn and look at how to construct a food chain. We're going to do that tomorrow. All right, so for now, we're going to end our video. Make sure you followed along with your guided notes. Make sure you wrote down any questions or concerns you might have. We will review this in class tomorrow. I hope everybody has a great rest of your day.